After being abandoned, she accepted a beggar's proposal, without knowing his true identity. Emma Collins felt the weight of her wedding dress as if it were chains while the minutes passed at the altar of that small church in the Brookside neighborhood of New York. The awkward silence of the few guests sitting on the wooden pews was broken only by nervous whispers and the muffled sound of someone coughing in the background. It had been over half an hour past the scheduled time when she finally accepted the truth everyone around her already knew. Ryan wouldn't come. Her fiancé, the man with whom she had planned to share her life, had simply vanished on their wedding day. "I think it's best we leave, dear," whispered her mother, Mrs. Margaret, trying to hide the embarrassment in her voice as she gently touched her arm. Emma didn't respond. Her eyes fixed on the church door refused to accept the humiliation. How could he do this? 3 years of dating, 6 months of engagement, all the promises made, and now, nothing. Just the cruel emptiness of a love that apparently never existed the way she believed it did. "Emma, let's go," her mother insisted, this time more firmly. That's when the tears began to fall. Unable to hold back any longer, Emma gathered the hem of her dress with both hands and ran out of the church, unable to face the pitying looks of the guests. Her friends tried to follow her, but she was faster, going through the side door and walking along the neighborhood sidewalks without any clear direction. The streets of Brookside were busy that Saturday afternoon. People were shopping, children were playing in the squares, couples were walking hand in hand. The world kept turning normally while hers was falling apart. Emma wandered aimlessly, the white veil fluttering behind her, people stopping to stare at the unusual sight of a lone bride crying in the streets. She didn't know how long she had been walking when she had to stop. Her legs were trembling, her whole body ached in a way that wasn't physical. She leaned against the wall of an old building, letting the tears flow freely down her face, already stained with smeared makeup. The bouquet of white roses she still held in one hand seemed to mock her, a cruel reminder of what should have been the happiest day of her life. "Are you okay, ma'am?" The male voice made her look up. A man was standing in front of her, keeping a respectful distance. He wore old, worn-out clothes, faded jeans with poorly done patches, a flannel shirt that had once been green but now had an undefined color from so much use. His dark hair fell messily over his shoulders, and an unshaven beard covered part of his face. Even so, there was something in his brown eyes that conveyed genuine kindness. Emma couldn't answer, just kept crying. The man hesitated for a moment, then pulled a clean cloth handkerchief carefully folded from his pants pocket and handed it to her. "I know I'm a stranger, but you look like you need help," he said, his voice surprisingly soft and polite, contrasting with his unkempt appearance. She took the handkerchief, more out of reflex than conscious will, and wiped her face. The fabric smelled of common soap, was clean and well ironed, which somehow seemed odd coming from someone who looked like that. "You were getting married today, weren't you?" he asked, observing the white dress. There was no judgment in his voice, just a gentle observation. Emma nodded, unable to speak without completely breaking down. "He didn't show up." Another nod. The words refused to come out of her throat, tight with emotion. The man stayed silent for a few seconds, as if pondering something important. Then he did something completely unexpected. He took a step forward, still keeping enough distance not to startle her, and spoke with a seriousness that caught her off guard. "Marry me." Emma blinked, sure she had misheard. She wiped her eyes again and looked at him, confused. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, and there was something determined in his expression. "Now. Today. You're in a wedding dress, clearly ready to get married. I'm offering. I know it sounds crazy, and it probably is, but you shouldn't go through this humiliation alone. You shouldn't return to that church empty-handed." "You're insane," Emma managed to say, her voice coming out weak and hoarse. "Maybe," he admitted with a sad half-smile. "But so what? You're suffering right now at this moment. I can do something about it. It doesn't have to mean anything more than a gesture, a way for you not to face the rest of this day completely defeated." Emma stared at him, trying to understand if this was real or if the shock was making her hallucinate. The man seemed sincere, no matter how absurd the proposal was. There was something in his eyes that suggested he understood the pain, as if he had been through something similar. "I don't even know your name," she murmured. "Michael. Michael James Parker." "I'm Emma. Emma Collins." They looked at each other for a long moment. Emma's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: anger at Ryan, shame about the situation, despair for the future that had just crumbled. And here was a complete stranger offering something absurd, but in a way tempting. A way out. A way not to return, completely defeated. "Why would you do this?" she asked, her voice still trembling. Michael shrugged, shoving his hands into the pockets of his worn-out pants. "Because I know what it's like to be abandoned. I know what it's like to feel like the ground has disappeared beneath your feet and that you're worthless. And because, maybe, we both need a second chance, even if it's not in the conventional way." Emma felt something stir inside her chest. It wasn't love, it wasn't attraction, not even trust. It was something more primitive, a mix of rebellion and self-destruction. A voice inside her screamed that this was madness, that she should go home, forget this horrible day and move on. But another voice, louder, said that she deserved to do something impulsive, something that proved to herself that she could go on, even without Ryan. "Are you serious?" she asked, needing to confirm one more time. "Completely. You understand that this is insane?" "I do. But what's the alternative? You go home and spend the next weeks or months dealing with the questions, the pity, the looks. Or you go back to that church, go through with the ceremony and prove to yourself that you can move forward." Emma took a deep breath. Maybe it was the shock, maybe it was the anger, or maybe it was simply the desperation of someone who had lost all bearings in a matter of hours. But she heard her own voice saying something she never imagined she would say. "Okay, let's go back." Surprise flickered across Michael's face, as if he himself couldn't believe she had agreed. But then he nodded, assuming a more serious posture. "Are you sure you can still change your mind?" "No," Emma replied, and there was a new firmness in her voice, born from anger and pain. "I won't change my mind. If he can abandon me like this, I can do whatever I want. And I want to do this." They began walking back to the church in silence. Emma held the bouquet with renewed strength, as if it were a weapon. Michael walked beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, his hands still in his pockets. People on the street continued to stare, now with even more curiosity upon seeing the bride in the white dress, next to a man who clearly wasn't the expected groom. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, when they arrived back at the church, most of the guests had already left. Only a few close relatives of Emma remained, speaking in hushed tones with the celebrant Father Patrick, a grey-haired man who had known her family for years. Mrs. Margaret was sitting in the first pew, her face in her hands, and lifted her head in alarm when she heard the footsteps. "Emma! What?" Mrs. Margaret stopped mid-sentence upon seeing the man beside her daughter. Her eyes widened, moving from the dirt-stained hem of the dress to the stranger in worn-out clothes, trying to process the surreal scene. "Mother," Emma said, her voice coming out steadier than she expected. "This is Michael, and we're getting married, now." The silence that followed was deafening. Father Patrick approached, his expression worried. "Emma, my child, you're in shock. You don't have to do this. Let's all go home, you rest and—" "I'm not in shock," Emma interrupted him, though everyone knew she was. "I'm making a decision. I came here to get married today, and that's what I'm going to do. This is Michael, and he has agreed to marry me." "But you don't even know this young man." Mrs. Margaret stood up, approaching with quick steps. "Emma, for God's sake, stop this madness. Let's go home." "I won't." Emma felt the tears returning, but this time they were tears of anger. "Don't you understand? I can't just go home and pretend nothing happened. I was here, waiting, and he didn't show up. Everyone saw, everyone knows, and I won't let this day end with my defeat." Michael, who had remained silent until then, stepped forward. "Mrs. Margaret, I understand your concern. I know I seem inadequate. He gestured to his shabby clothes. "But I won't harm your daughter. I promise. She's going through a tough time and I just want to help. If this is what she needs right now, I offer myself." "And who are you? Where did you come from?" Mrs. Margaret stared at him with suspicion and fear. "What kind of man offers marriage to a complete stranger on the street?" "A man who understands her pain," Michael replied simply, "and who has nothing left to lose." The phrase hung heavy with meaning, but before anyone could question it, Emma turned to Father Patrick. "Please, Father, I know this is unusual, but can you perform the ceremony? I need this." Father Patrick looked from Emma to Michael, then to Mrs. Margaret, clearly torn between following the rules and helping someone who was obviously suffering. Finally, he sighed heavily. "Emma, my child, I cannot in good conscience perform a marriage like this. You're emotionally shaken, and this isn't a decision to be made in the heat of the moment." "Then I'll find another place," Emma replied, her voice breaking. "But I will get married today, with or without the church's blessing." "Emma!" Mrs. Margaret tried to grab her arm, but she pulled away. It was then that Michael spoke again, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "Father, I understand your concerns, they're valid, but Emma needs to feel she has control over something today. She needs to feel she can make her own decisions, even if they seem impulsive. You've seen many marriages in your life, I imagine. Some based on love, others on convenience, others on necessity. This one would be based on solidarity, on humanity. Isn't that worthy too?" Father Patrick studied him for a long moment. There was something in the way Michael spoke, in his careful choice of words, that didn't match his ragged appearance. Finally, the priest shook his head, defeated. "May God forgive me if this is a mistake," he murmured. "But all right, I'll perform the ceremony. However, I insist that both of you understand the seriousness of what you're doing. Marriage isn't a joke, even under circumstances like these." "I understand, Father," Michael said. "So do I," Emma confirmed, though her voice trembled. Mrs. Margaret let out a distressed groan and sat back down on the pew, her face in her hands. The few relatives still present watched the scene with varying expressions of shock and disapproval. Emma's Aunt Beatrice, a white-haired woman with a severe gaze, approached. "You'll regret this, girl," she said in a low tone. "You'll bitterly regret it." Emma didn't respond. She simply took her place again at the altar, beside Michael. Father Patrick returned to his position, flipping through the prayer book with slow movements, as if still hoping someone would stop this madness. The ceremony was quick and austere. No music, no flowers beyond the already wilted bouquet in Emma's hands, no smiles. Father Patrick recited the traditional words, but there was a sadness in his voice that made clear what he thought about the situation. When it came time for the vows, Michael looked directly into Emma's eyes. "I, Michael James Parker, take you, Emma Collins, as my wife," he said, and there was an unexpected sincerity in his words. "I promise to respect your pain, give you space when you need it, and be here while you need me." They weren't the traditional vows, but somehow they seemed more honest. Emma felt a lump in her throat. "I, Emma Collins, take you, Michael James Parker, as my husband," she managed to say, her voice shaky. "And I promise not to regret this decision." Father Patrick declared them husband and wife without the usual enthusiasm. There was no kiss, no applause, just a heavy, uncomfortable silence that filled the entire church. Emma looked at the bouquet in her hands and, on impulse, threw it to the ground. There was no one to throw it to, no single friend waiting to catch it. Only the dead weight of a day that should have been happy. "Let's go," she said to Michael, turning to leave the church. Mrs. Margaret stood up, tears streaming down her face. "Emma, please, don't do this. Come home. We can talk, we can—" "I've made my decision, Mom," Emma replied without looking back. "I'll be fine." But as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed her own words. She left the church for the second time that day, but this time she wasn't alone. Michael walked beside her in silence, seeming just as lost as she was about what to do next. When they reached the sidewalk, Emma finally stopped. The reality of what she had just done began to penetrate the fog of anger and despair. She had gotten married to a complete stranger. a man she had found crying on the street half an hour ago. "What have I done?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. Michael didn't answer immediately. He just stood there beside her, waiting. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "You made a choice. It might not have been the wisest, but it was yours. And that's something." Emma looked at him, really looked, for the first time. Despite the unshaven beard and old clothes, he had a handsome face, eyes that held a deep sadness, but also a genuine kindness. There were small scars on his hands, marks of manual labor. He was taller than her, even with her wedding heels, and his posture was strangely dignified despite his unkempt appearance. "I don't even know where you live," she said, the practical reality of the situation finally hitting her. "I don't have a place to live," Michael admitted bluntly. "I sleep in shelters, sometimes on the street. I do odd jobs when I can." Emma felt her stomach turn. She had married a homeless man. What had been an act of rebellion suddenly seemed much more real and frightening. "But I won't be a burden to you," Michael continued quickly, sensing her panic. "I said I'd do this for you, not for me. If you want me to leave now, that's fine. We can annul the marriage tomorrow. Nobody even needs to know." Emma shook her head, trying to organize her thoughts. "No, I have an apartment. It's small, just one bedroom and a living room, but you can—" She stopped, not believing what she was about to say. "You can stay there just until we figure all this out." "Are you sure?" "No," Emma admitted with a bitter laugh, "but I've already done so many crazy things today that one more won't make a difference." They started walking. Emma took off her high heels and carried them in her hands, her bare feet on the cold pavement. The wedding dress was dirty and torn at the hem. Her hair had come loose from the elaborate hairstyle, her makeup smeared from crying. She looked like a distorted version of a fairy tale bride, and Michael beside her in his worn-out clothes completed the surreal picture. Emma's apartment was a 20-minute walk away. It was an old building in the neighborhood, 4 floors with no elevator. She lived on the 3rd floor. As they climbed the stairs, Emma could feel the curious stares of the neighbors who saw them pass. Mrs. Rose, the neighbor on the 2nd floor, opened her door as soon as she heard them. "Emma, but what?" "I'll explain later, Mrs. Rose," Emma said quickly, continuing to climb. When they finally reached the apartment, she opened the door and they went in. It was a small but well-kept space. The living room had an old but clean sofa, a bookshelf with books, a small television. The kitchen was tiny, separated from the living room by a counter. One door led to the single bedroom, another to the bathroom. Emma let her shoes drop to the floor and turned to Michael, who remained near the door as if unsure whether to come all the way in. "You can leave what you brought somewhere," she said, but then realized he had nothing. No suitcase, no bag, just the clothes he was wearing. The reality of his situation hit her with renewed force. "I have nothing," Michael said simply, following her gaze. "Everything I had, I lost a long time ago." Emma felt a wave of conflicting emotions: compassion, fear, confusion, regret. She had brought a stranger into her home, a man she didn't know, who had nothing, who lived on the streets. What was she thinking? "You can take a shower," she heard her own voice saying. "There are clean towels in the bathroom, and I'll see if I have any clothes that fit you. Maybe something of my father's that was stored away." Michael nodded, grateful. "Thank you. I promise I'll leave if you change your mind. You don't have to feel any obligation. Just go take a shower," Emma said, suddenly too exhausted to deal with anything more. As Michael went into the bathroom, she went to the bedroom and finally took off the wedding dress. She looked at it thrown on the bed, that symbol of shattered hopes, and felt the tears return. But this time she cried silently, without the dramatic sobs from before. It was a deeper, more real sadness, penetrating every part of her being. She put on comfortable pajamas and went to the closet in the hallway where she kept old boxes. She found the one she was looking for, full of clothes from her father who had passed away 3 years ago. Mrs. Margaret always asked her to throw them away, but Emma never could. Now, as she pulled out a pair of jeans and a simple shirt, she felt a pang of guilt mixed with sadness. "Sorry, Dad," she whispered to the box. "I think you'd understand the craziness I did today. You always said I was too impulsive. She heard the shower water stop. A few minutes later, Michael came out of the bathroom with a towel wrapped around his waist, his wet hair falling over his shoulders, his beard still unshaven, but his face noticeably cleaner. Emma handed him the clothes without saying a word, avoiding looking directly at him. "I'll make something to eat," she murmured, heading to the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she opened the refrigerator. There wasn't much. Some leftovers, eggs, a bit of rice. She decided to make something simple. As she cooked, she tried not to think. Not to think about Ryan, not to think about the ruined marriage, not to think about the stranger now in her living room wearing her father's clothes. Michael appeared a few minutes later, dressed. The clothes were a bit loose on him, but they fit reasonably well. With his face clean and hair combed, he looked different, less threatening. There was a dignity in him that wasn't apparent before. "Can I help?" he asked. "No need," Emma replied, but then changed her mind. "Actually, you can set the table. The plates are in that cabinet." They worked in silence, a strange sense of domesticity hanging in the air. When the food was ready, they sat at the small kitchen table. Emma realized she hadn't eaten anything since breakfast and suddenly felt ravenous. Michael ate slowly, carefully, as if he didn't want to seem desperate, but she noticed how his eyes closed with gratitude with each bite. "When was the last time you ate?" she asked suddenly. Michael hesitated before answering. "Yesterday. At the shelter where I slept, they serve breakfast." Emma felt her chest tighten. Here she was, wallowing in self-pity for being abandoned, while this man struggled every day just to get food and a place to sleep. "Why are you living like this?" The question came out before she could stop herself. "You don't seem... the way you talk... don't seem like someone who should be on the street." Michael finished with a sad half-smile. "It's a long story, and it's not pretty." "We have time," Emma said, realizing she truly wanted to know. She needed to understand who this man she had married was. Michael put his fork down on the plate and stared at it for a long moment, as if deciding how much to share. "I had a different life," he began slowly. "A good life. Or at least, I thought I had. But I found out in the worst possible way that it was all an illusion. And when that illusion fell apart, I fell apart with it." "What happened?" "Betrayal," he said simply. "Not the romantic kind, though there was some of that too, but mostly betrayal by people I trusted, people I considered family. They took everything from me and I let them. Because at the time I was so emotionally broken that it didn't matter anymore." Emma saw the pain in his eyes and recognized something familiar in it. It was the same pain she was feeling now, just on a different scale. "How long ago?" 2 years, Michael replied. 2 years living like this, trying to disappear, trying to punish myself for being stupid enough not to see what was happening right under my nose. "And your family? Your parents?" A bitter smile crossed his face. "My parents had a family business. It was small when I was a child, but it grew over the years. When they got older, they passed everything on to me and my partner, Daniel, who was like a brother to me. Or at least I thought he was." He paused, his jaw tight with emotion. "My parents trusted us to carry on their legacy, and I failed. Daniel set up a scheme, embezzled money, created debts in the company's name. By the time I found out, it was too late. I lost everything. The business, the house, the savings, and my parents, they couldn't bear to see it all fall apart. My father had a heart problem, and my mother was so shaken that she had to be hospitalized. They're in a nursing home now, being cared for with what little was left from selling some belongings. And Daniel, what happened to him?" "He disappeared, took the money and left. I tried to report it, but he covered his tracks well. And I was so broken, so ashamed that I didn't have the strength to fight. I just gave up on everything. I thought I deserved to suffer for being so blind." Emma didn't know what to say. His story was so tragic, so heavy, that her own pains seemed small in comparison, but she understood the feeling of betrayal, of having your trust destroyed in the worst way possible. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "You don't need to be," Michael replied, quickly wiping his eyes. "My own choices brought me here. But today, when I saw you crying on the street dressed as a bride and so obviously shattered, I saw myself. I saw that moment, when everything falls apart and you no longer know who you are, and I thought maybe I could do something. Maybe I could stop you from sinking into the same black hole I fell into." Emma felt the tears returning, but this time they weren't just from sadness. There was something else there, a strange connection with this man who had been a complete stranger just hours before. "Thank you," she whispered, "for doing what you did, even if it was crazy." "Maybe we need a little craziness sometimes," Michael said with a tired smile, "to remind us we're still alive." They finished eating in silence, but it was a different silence now, less uncomfortable, more understanding. After washing the dishes together, Emma showed him the sofa. "You can sleep here. There are blankets in the closet. I'll go to the bedroom." "Go." "Emma," Michael called out when she was almost at the bedroom door, "if you change your mind tomorrow about all this, I understand. It won't offend me. You don't owe me anything." She nodded, not knowing what to say, and closed the bedroom door behind her. She sat on the bed and looked at the wedding dress thrown on the floor. This should have been her wedding night. She should have been in a hotel, in Ryan's arms, beginning her new life as a married woman. Instead, she was alone in her room while a stranger slept on her sofa. But strangely, for the first time since Ryan didn't show up at the church, Emma didn't feel completely alone. There was someone there who understood the pain, who knew betrayal, and somehow that made all the difference. She lay on the bed, fully dressed, pulling the blanket over herself, and closed her eyes. Sleep was slow to come, her mind reliving all the moments of that insane day. But eventually exhaustion won, and she fell asleep with one certainty: her life would never be the same again. The next morning, Emma woke up disoriented. For a brief moment, she thought everything had been a horrible nightmare. But then she saw the wedding dress on the floor and reality came crashing back. She had been left at the altar. She had married a stranger. A homeless man was sleeping in her living room. She got up slowly, washed her face, and brushed her teeth mechanically. When she opened the bedroom door expecting to find Michael still sleeping on the sofa, she was surprised. He wasn't there. The blankets were carefully folded on the sofa, and there was a smell of coffee coming from the kitchen. She entered the kitchen and found him preparing breakfast. He had found bread in the cabinet and was making toast, and there was hot scrambled eggs in the pan. The table was carefully set, everything organized. "Good morning," he said when he saw her. "I hope you don't mind. I thought I could repay your hospitality by making breakfast." Emma blinked, still processing the scene. "You know how to cook?" "I learned out of necessity over the last 2 years," he replied with a half smile. "When you don't have money to eat out, you need to know how to manage." They sat down to eat, and Emma noticed that despite everything, the food was good, better than she would have made herself, actually. "I was thinking," Michael said after a moment, "about what to do now. I understand that yesterday was a moment of impulse for you. So if you want, we can go take care of the divorce today. It shouldn't be hard, considering the circumstances." Emma chewed slowly, thinking. The cold morning light brought a clarity that was missing the day before. What she had done was, objectively, insane. Marrying a complete stranger, bringing him to her home. But at the same time, looking at Michael there, ready to leave without question, she didn't feel the urgency she expected to feel. "Not today," she heard herself saying. Let's think it over. It doesn't have to be today." Michael studied her for a moment but didn't question it. "As you wish. It's your decision." "And you?" Emma asked. "What do you want?" "Honestly?" Michael rested his elbows on the table. "I don't know. Yesterday I just wanted to help someone who was suffering. I didn't think beyond that, but now I don't know what to do either." "You can stay." The words came out of Emma before she could fully think them through. "Just for now, until we decide what to do. You have nowhere to go, and it would be cruel of me to throw you out on the street after everything." "You don't owe me anything, Emma." "I know, but even so, you can stay. But we need rules." "Rules?" "Yes. You sleep on the couch. Don't touch my things without asking. And you need to help with expenses. If you get some work, contribute what you can. Michael nodded immediately. Fair, I accept. And I promise I'll look for work today. And there's one more thing, Emma continued, feeling she needed to set clear boundaries. This is only temporary. It's not a real marriage, it's just a practical situation until we sort everything out. Understood. They finished their coffee in silence. Emma picked up her purse and checked her phone for the first time since yesterday. Dozens of messages and missed calls. Her mother, her friends, even some cousins. Everyone wanting to know what had happened, if she was okay, where she was. There were also 3 messages from Ryan. Emma's stomach churned seeing his name on the screen. She opened the messages with trembling fingers. The first one said, "Emma, I'm sorry. I can't explain now, but please believe I didn't mean to do this." The second, "Please answer the phone. We need to talk." The third, sent late at night. "I know you must hate me, I deserve it, but please give me a chance to explain." Emma felt anger rising in her veins. Now he wanted to explain? After humiliating her in front of everyone, leaving her waiting at the altar like a fool. She threw the phone on the table harder than she intended. "Your ex?" Michael asked gently. "Yes," wanting to explain, as if there were any possible explanation for what he did. "Are you going to answer?" Emma shook her head firmly. "No, at least not now. I don't know if I can look at him without falling apart again. It's your choice, but eventually you'll need to talk to him, if only to get answers." "I know," Emma admitted reluctantly. "But not now. Right now I just want to get through the day." She picked up the phone again and typed a quick message to her mother. "I'm okay. I just need some time." "Don't worry." She sent it before she could change her mind and turned off the phone completely. "I'm going out to look for work," Michael said, standing up. "Will you be okay alone?" "I will," Emma replied, though she wasn't sure. "I'll probably do some work too. I have some sewing projects that are behind." It was true. Emma worked as a freelance seamstress, mainly doing alterations and repairs for neighbors and acquaintances. She didn't earn much, but it was enough to pay the rent and basic bills. She had an old but functional sewing machine in the corner of the living room, surrounded by fabrics and threads. "Are you a seamstress?" Michael asked, noticing her glance toward the machine. "Yes. I learned from my grandmother. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills." "Sewing is an art," Michael said sincerely. "My mother used to make clothes for me when I was a child. She always said it was like magic, turning simple fabrics into something people wore and loved." Emma smiled for the first time in what felt like years. "Your mother was wise." Michael nodded, a sadness crossing his face at the mention of his mother. Then he turned to leave but stopped at the door. "Emma, thank you for not sending me away this morning. I know this isn't what you expected from your life." "To be honest, nothing in the last 2 days has been what I expected," she replied. "But we're dealing with it, right?" "Right," he agreed with a small smile before leaving. After he was gone, Emma stood still in the middle of the room, feeling the heavy silence of the apartment. Part of her wanted to go back to bed and not come out for a week, but the other part, the stubborn part that always kept her going even when things got tough, pushed her toward the sewing machine. Work had always been her way of coping with problems. When her father passed away, she sewed for days without stopping, making pieces she never sold, just needing to feel the fabric between her fingers and hear the hum of the machine. When her previous relationship ended before she met Ryan, she did the same thing. Now she pulled out one of the dresses that needed mending and started working. The hours passed as she lost herself in the familiar rhythm of sewing. She didn't think about Ryan, didn't think about the ruined wedding, didn't think about the stranger who now shared her apartment. She just focused on the stitches, one after another, mending, adjusting, transforming. She was so absorbed that she didn't even hear the first knock at the door. The second knock, more insistent, finally snapped her out of her trance. She stood up, wiping her hands on her pants, and went to open it. It was Mrs. Margaret, her mother, carrying a bag of food. She looked at Emma with a mix of anger and concern. "Are you going to let me in, or do I have to break down the door?" Emma sighed and stepped aside. She knew this confrontation was inevitable. Mrs. Margaret walked in with firm steps, placing the bag on the kitchen table before turning to face her daughter. She was a strong woman in her 60s, grey hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes that had seen a lot in life but still held a flame of determination. "Where is he?" she asked bluntly. "He went out to look for work." "Work?" Mrs. Margaret repeated with disbelief. "Emma, what were you thinking? Bringing a homeless man into your home? You don't even know this man." "I know, Mom, but nothing." Mrs. Margaret raised her voice, worry spilling over into anger. "You may have been left at the altar and I understand you're hurting, but that doesn't justify doing something this crazy. This man could be dangerous." "He's not dangerous," Emma replied, and she realized she truly believed that. There was something about Michael, in the way he spoke and carried himself, that felt safe rather than threatening. "You don't know that," her mother insisted. "Emma, for heaven's sake, you married him. Legally married. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand better than you think." Mrs. Margaret stopped, studying her daughter's face. Then she sighed heavily and sat at the table, suddenly looking very tired. "Ryan called me," she said more calmly. "Trying to find out where you were." Emma's stomach churned. "And what did you say?" "That you were fine and that you didn't want to talk to him. What else could I say?" Mrs. Margaret looked at her hands. "He seemed devastated, Emma. Said he made a terrible mistake." "A mistake," Emma repeated bitterly. "Abandoning me at the altar was a mistake? Like forgetting the car keys?" "I'm not defending what he did," her mother said quickly. "It was inexcusable, but you'll have to talk to him eventually, if only to get an explanation." "Everyone keeps saying that." Emma sat down heavily in the chair across from her mother. "But I don't want explanations. Not now. Maybe never. What could he possibly say that would make that any less humiliating?" "Nothing," Mrs. Margaret admitted. "But you still deserve to know why. Not for him, but for you. To be able to move on." Emma knew her mother was right, but she wasn't ready. Maybe she never would be. "And what about this Michael?" Mrs. Margaret continued. "What do you know about him?" "Not much," Emma admitted. "But he told me last night. He had a family business, was robbed by his partner, lost everything. He's been on the streets for 2 years. And you just believe that story. Why would he lie?" "To gain your trust," Mrs. Margaret said pragmatically. "Emma, I'm not saying he's a bad person, but you need to be careful. Especially now that you're vulnerable." Emma had no answer for that. Her mother was right to be cautious, but there was something about Michael that made her trust him, something that went beyond logic. "I'll be careful, Mom, I promise. But he's staying, at least for now." Mrs. Margaret opened her mouth to protest, but then closed it. She knew her daughter well enough to know when she had made a decision. "Then at least let me get to know him better," she said finally. "Bring him to dinner, tomorrow, at my house. I want to see with my own eyes what kind of man this is that you married." Emma wanted to refuse, but she knew it would be unfair. If Michael was staying, even temporarily, she couldn't hide him from the family forever. "All right," she agreed reluctantly. "Tomorrow, but promise you'll be polite." "I'm always polite," Mrs. Margaret replied with offended dignity, though both knew that wasn't entirely true. After her mother left, leaving enough food for a week, Emma went back to her sewing. But now her mind was restless, thinking about tomorrow's dinner, imagining how it would be. Michael meeting her family, her mother inevitably asking tough questions, the whole awkward situation. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Michael return until he spoke. "I got it." Emma looked up, startled. He was at the door, a genuine smile on his face for the first time since she'd met him. "Got what?" "A job, temporary but it's work, at a construction site nearby. The foreman needed another helper. I start early tomorrow." "That's great." Emma stood up, genuinely happy for him. "How did you get it so fast?" "Luck, I guess." Michael came into the apartment, his energy different, lighter. "Or maybe it's a sign that things are going to get better, for both of us." The way he said both of us did something strange in Emma's chest, as if they were really a unit, not just two strangers sharing space. "My mother was here," she said, changing the subject. "She wants you to come to dinner tomorrow at her house." Michael's smile wavered a bit. "Is she receptive to the situation?" "She's worried," Emma answered honestly, "and suspicious, but she said she wants to get to know you better." "I see. And you? Do you want me to go?" Emma thought for a moment. Part of her wanted to cancel, to avoid the inevitable awkwardness. But another part knew she couldn't live hidden forever. "I think so. If you're willing to face my mother asking 1,000 questions." Ryan laughed, a genuine and pleasant sound. "I've faced worse. I think I can handle a worried mother." That night, they had dinner together again, a strange routine beginning to form. Ryan told her about his day, the people he met while looking for work, the difficulties, but also the small kindnesses. Emma talked about her sewing projects, about her mother's visit, about the anxiety regarding tomorrow's dinner. It was surprisingly easy to talk to him. Ryan was a good listener, but also shared when appropriate. There was no judgment in his voice, just a quiet understanding from someone who had already been through a lot. When it was time to sleep, Ryan settled on the sofa again with the blankets. Emma went to the bedroom, but, for the second night, found it hard to fall asleep. She lay listening to the soft sounds of the apartment, aware of the presence of another person there, a strange feeling but not necessarily uncomfortable. For the first time since the wedding disaster, Emma caught herself thinking not only about what she had lost, but also about what, strangely, she had gained. It wasn't what she had planned, it wasn't even close to what she had dreamed of, but it was something. And for now, perhaps that was enough. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The morning of the dinner at Mrs. Margaret's house arrived faster than Emma would have liked. She spent hours choosing what to wear, changing clothes several times, until Ryan, watching her growing anxiety, made a kind comment. "You look beautiful like that. Really, you don't need to worry so much." Emma looked at him, surprised. It was the first time he had made a comment about her appearance. She was wearing a simple navy blue dress, nothing extravagant but neat. "Sorry, I'm just nervous. My mother can be intense." "I imagined so," Ryan smiled. "But I understand. If I had a daughter who brought a stranger home after being left at the altar, I'd be intense too. Your mother is right to be protective." Emma nodded, taking a deep breath. She picked up her purse and they left together. Mrs. Margaret's house was a 15-minute bus ride away. During the journey, Emma watched Ryan discreetly. He had shaved for the first time since she'd met him, and with his face clean, she could see his features better. He had a handsome face, strong but gentle features, eyes that carried stories she didn't yet fully know. When they arrived at the house, a simple but well-kept building in a nearby neighborhood, Mrs. Margaret was already waiting at the door. Her gaze assessed Ryan from head to toe before opening into a polite but cold smile. "Ryan, welcome. Please come in." The house was immaculate, as always. Mrs. Margaret had prepared a plentiful table with rice, beans, farofa, roasted meat, and salad. The smell of home-cooked food filled the room, bringing a nostalgia that made Emma's chest tighten. How many times had she come here with Robert? How many similar dinners had they shared, planning a future that would never come? "Please sit down," Mrs. Margaret indicated the table. "The food is ready." They sat down, and for a few minutes only the sound of cutlery cutting food broke the tense silence. Emma knew it was only a matter of time before the questions started. "So Ryan, Mrs. Margaret began, her voice deceptively casual. "Emma told me you had a family business. What was the business like?" Ryan swallowed his food before answering, keeping calm. "It was a property management company. It started with my grandfather, then my father took over, and eventually it passed to me. It wasn't anything grand, but it was stable. We took care of some commercial buildings here in New York, handled maintenance, dealt with tenants, those kinds of things." "And what happened?" Michael hesitated, glancing briefly at Emma before answering. My partner, Daniel, had been embezzling funds for years without me noticing. When I found out, it was already too late. He had set up a very elaborate scheme, created fake contracts, made up fictitious expenses. When it all came to light, the company was in huge debt. I lost everything trying to pay the creditors. And this Daniel? Mrs. Margaret pressed. Where is he now? I don't know, Michael answered honestly. He disappeared soon after. I tried to look for him, but with no resources, no strength to fight, I eventually gave up. And your parents, couldn't they help? A shadow crossed Michael's face. My parents were devastated. That company was their life's legacy. My father got sick from the stress, and my mother, she couldn't handle seeing everything fall apart. They're being taken care of now, but they're not the people they used to be. And I carry that guilt every day. Mrs. Margaret fell silent, processing the information. Emma saw her mother's expression soften slightly, the distrust giving way to something like compassion. And you decided to live on the streets because of that? She asked, her voice a bit gentler. It wasn't exactly a decision, Michael explained. It was more of a surrender. I lost everything, including the will to rebuild. I thought I deserved to suffer for being so blind, so trusting. So I stopped fighting. I let everything happen. And what changed? Mrs. Margaret looked between him and Emma. Why did you agree to help my daughter? Michael thought carefully before answering. Because I saw her crying and remembered what it was like to be at that breaking point, where everything you thought you knew about your life falls apart in seconds. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could do something good. Something that would mean my own downfall wasn't completely in vain. Emma felt her eyes well up. There was so much sincerity in his words, so much shared pain, that it was impossible not to be moved. And do you have serious intentions regarding my daughter? Mrs. Margaret asked the question directly, without beating around the bush. Mom, Emma protested, her face blushing. It's a valid question. Mrs. Margaret silenced her with a look. You are married, after all, even if it was under the craziest circumstances possible. Michael put his fork down on the plate and looked directly at Mrs. Margaret. I have no expectations, if that's what you're asking. I offered to help Emma in a moment of her desperation. If she decides she wants me to leave tomorrow, I'll go without complaint. But as long as she allows me to stay, I'll do my best to be useful, to help, and to respect her space and her decisions. And if she decides to stay with you, for real? Emma held her breath, waiting for the answer. Then I would be the luckiest person in the world, Michael said simply. And I would do everything in my power to be worthy of that chance. Mrs. Margaret studied Michael for a long moment, her experienced eyes searching for signs of falseness or manipulation. Finally she nodded, seeming to reach some internal conclusion. All right. I still think you two are crazy, but I see you're sincere. And that's more than I can say for certain people. She gave a meaningful look at Emma, clearly referring to Ryan. The dinner continued in a more relaxed atmosphere. Mrs. Margaret told stories from Emma's childhood, some embarrassing enough to make Emma roll her eyes. But Michael laughed genuinely, asking questions, showing real interest. It was easy to forget in those moments that he was practically a stranger. When they were leaving, late at night, Mrs. Margaret pulled Emma aside. He seems like a good man, she admitted reluctantly. But still, be careful, my daughter. Your heart has been broken once. Don't let it happen again. I'll be careful, Mom, Emma promised, hugging her. But thank you for trying to understand. On the way back home, Emma and Michael walked in comfortable silence. The evening was cool, the streets of Brookside quiet. When they were almost at the apartment, Michael spoke. Your mother is a strong woman. You can see where you got your strength from. Emma smiled. She is, and I know I seemed weak crying on that street, but you didn't seem weak, Michael gently interrupted her. Crying isn't weakness. Continuing on, even after crying, that's strength. And you continued. They reached the building and went up the stairs. Inside the apartment, Emma made tea while Michael took off his shoes and sat on the sofa. There was a strange domesticity in these simple actions, as if they had been doing this for years instead of just a few days. Michael, Emma said as she brought the teacups. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really do that? Not the answer you gave my mother, but the whole truth." Michael took his cup, holding it between his hands, looking at the hot liquid as if searching for the right words. "The whole truth?" He took a deep breath. "Because for the past 2 years, living on the streets, I felt invisible. People look right through you when you're in that situation. It's like you stop being human, you become just another obstacle on the sidewalk. And I accepted that. I accepted being invisible, being nobody." He paused, taking a sip of tea. "But when I saw you there, crying in your wedding dress, something inside me woke up. It was like the universe was giving me one last chance to be someone, to do something that mattered. And I grabbed that chance. Selfishly, maybe. Because I needed to feel human again, even if it was just for a moment." Emma felt her chest tighten with the raw honesty of his words. "It wasn't selfish," she said softly. "It was human. It was kind, and I'm grateful." They sat in silence, drinking tea, each lost in their own thoughts. Emma found herself watching Michael, really watching. In the last few days, he had transformed. Not just physically, although he was cleaner, more put together. But there was something in his eyes, a light that wasn't there before. As if having a purpose, even if temporary, had rekindled something in him. "I need to tell you something," Emma said suddenly, guilt weighing on her conscience. "Ryan has been trying to get in touch. He sent messages, called several times." Michael nodded, not seeming surprised. "And are you going to talk to him?" "I don't know," Emma admitted. "Part of me wants answers, wants to understand why he did that, but another part is afraid of what he'll say, afraid that the answers won't make a difference." "You don't owe me explanations, Emma. If you want to talk to him, talk. If you don't, don't. That's your decision." "But we're married," Emma said, the words sounding strange coming out of her mouth. "Even if it's a crazy situation, it still counts, and I don't want you to think that I'm—" "Emma," Michael gently interrupted her, "I know exactly what we are. 2 strangers who did something impulsive in a moment of pain. You don't owe me loyalty. You don't owe me anything. If sorting things out with your ex is what you need to move forward, then do that." But even as he said the right words, the generous words, Emma saw something in his eyes, a sadness perhaps, or fear, as if the idea of her leaving, of sorting things out with Ryan and undoing this crazy marriage, hurt more than he was willing to admit. And Emma realized, with a shock that left her breathless, that the idea hurt her too. In those few days, Michael had become a constant presence in her life. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something. A connection, an understanding, a feeling of not being completely alone in the dark. "I don't know what to do," she confessed, her voice small. "Nobody does, Emma. Life doesn't come with an instruction manual. We just do the best we can with the information we have." That night, lying in her bed, Emma couldn't sleep. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion. Ryan, Michael, the destroyed marriage, the crazy marriage, the uncertain future. Everything seemed so complicated, so impossible to resolve. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep. She got up and went to the living room, thinking about making another cup of tea. But she stopped when she saw Michael sitting on the sofa, awake, looking out the window. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. He turned, surprised. "Sorry. I tried to be quiet so I wouldn't wake you." "I was already awake." Emma sat down next to him on the sofa, keeping a respectful distance. "What are you thinking about?" Michael hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I was thinking about how strange life is. A week ago, I was sleeping in a shelter, with no expectations, no hope. And now I'm here, in a comfortable apartment with a job starting tomorrow and a friend who offered me kindness when I had nothing." "It is strange," Emma agreed. "A week ago, I was excited for my wedding, planning my life with Ryan. And now you're married to me," Michael completed with a sad smile. "Not exactly what you planned." "No," Emma admitted. "But maybe what we plan isn't always what we need." They sat in silence, looking out the window at the city lights. And Emma realized there was a comfort in that silence, a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Even with all the confusion, all the uncertainty, there was something right about being there, in that moment, with this man who had appeared out of nowhere and changed everything. The following days fell into a strange but functional routine. Michael woke up early to work at the construction site, returning in the afternoon tired but satisfied. Emma continued with her sewing work, and in the evenings they had dinner together, talked, shared the small events of the day. It was almost domestic, almost normal. If someone saw them from the outside, they would think they were a common couple, building a life together. But both knew it was temporary, a fragile bubble that could burst at any moment. It was on Thursday, exactly 1 week after the crazy marriage, that the bubble began to crack. Emma was sewing when she heard insistent knocks on the door. She thought it was her mother again, or maybe a neighbor bringing work, but when she opened the door, she felt her blood run cold. It was Ryan. He looked different from how she remembered. Thinner, with deep, dark circles under his eyes, unshaven. He looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. When he saw her, his eyes filled with tears. "Emma," he said, his voice breaking, "please, I need to talk to you." Emma stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move. Part of her wanted to slam the door in his face. Another part wanted to scream, to ask how he had the nerve to show up there. But no words came out. "I know I have no right," Ryan continued quickly, as if he feared she would close the door at any moment. "I know I did the worst thing I could do, but please give me 5 minutes, just 5 minutes to explain. After that, if you want me to disappear from your life forever, I will. I promise." "Emma?" Michael's voice came from inside the apartment. He had come home from work early. "Is everything okay?" Ryan looked past her, seeing Michael approach. His eyes widened, processing the scene, the intimacy suggested by the presence of another man in Emma's apartment. "Who is this?" he asked, confusion mixed with something like jealousy in his voice. "He's my husband," Emma heard her own voice say, surprisingly firm. The silence that followed was absolute. Ryan looked from Emma to Michael and back to Emma, trying to process what he had heard. "You're... what?" "My husband," Emma repeated, and she felt Michael step closer, standing by her side in a silent show of support. "We got married. On the day you left me waiting at the altar." "This is insane." Ryan shook his head, looking incredulous. "Emma, you can't have... you don't even know this guy." "And did you know me?" Emma shot back, the anger finally surfacing. 3 years together, and you abandoned me on our wedding day without a word of explanation, so don't come here and tell me what I can or cannot do." "Emma, please let me explain," Ryan begged. "It's not what you think. I didn't leave you because I wanted to. I think you'd better leave," Michael interrupted calmly, but there was a firmness in his voice. "Emma doesn't want to talk to you right now." "And who do you think you are?" Ryan glared at him, frustration spilling over into aggression. "You take advantage of a vulnerable woman and think you have the right to—" "I didn't take advantage of anyone," Michael kept his voice calm, "and Emma is perfectly capable of making her own decisions. If she wants to talk to you, she will. But right now, she doesn't. So respect that." "Emma," Ryan ignored Michael, focusing on her, "please just listen to me. My mother got very sick. On the morning of the wedding, she had a serious complication. She went into a coma. I was at the hospital with her. My phone died, and I was so desperate, so terrified, that I couldn't think of anything else. When I finally remembered the wedding, it was too late." Emma felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. His mother, Mrs. Linda, who had always been so kind to her, in a coma. "You're lying," she whispered, wanting to believe it was a lie because the alternative was too horrible. "I'm not." Ryan took his phone out of his pocket with trembling hands, showing pictures of a hospital, of a woman in a bed surrounded by equipment, of Ryan beside her looking destroyed. "She has a heart condition. The doctors didn't think it was serious, but that morning, everything happened so fast, and I just froze. I couldn't think. I couldn't function. All that mattered was that my mother was dying." Emma looked at the pictures, horror and understanding hitting her in successive waves. Mrs. Linda really was in a coma. The date on the pictures matched the day of the wedding. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't a flimsy excuse. It was real. "Why didn't you call?" she asked, her voice coming out weak. "Why didn't you send someone to let me know?" "I tried." Ryan ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "But my phone was dead, and in my panic, I just forgot everything. I know it's no excuse. I know I should have found a way. But Emma, I swear, it wasn't because I wanted to hurt you. It was never that." Michael lightly touched Emma's shoulder. "Do you want to talk to him? I can give you space if you want." Emma looked at Michael, then at Ryan, trying to process everything. Her world, which was already upside down, had just turned completely inside out. Ryan hadn't abandoned her out of a lack of love. It had been a family emergency, a moment of understandable panic. But at the same time, she had moved on. She had made decisions. She had married Michael. She had started to build something new, even if it was fragile and uncertain. "I need to think," she finally said. "Ryan, I need time to process all of this." "How much time do you need?" Ryan asked anxiously. "Emma, my mother is stable now, but she's still in the hospital. And I can't stop thinking about you. About how I ruined everything. About how I lost you." "I don't know how much time," Emma admitted, "but it's not an answer I can give right now, here in this moment." Ryan nodded slowly, defeat clear in his eyes. "Okay, I'll wait, however long it takes. But Emma, please believe I never meant to hurt you. I love you, I always have." After Ryan left, Emma closed the door and leaned against it, her legs shaking so much she could barely stand. Michael was at her side immediately, holding her by the arms. "Are you okay?" "No," Emma answered honestly. "I'm not okay at all." He guided her to the couch, sitting beside her. Emma buried her face in her hands, trying to organize the thoughts spinning wildly in her head. "He didn't abandon me," she murmured. "It wasn't because he wanted to. It was because his mother was—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I know," Michael said softly. "I heard." "This changes everything." Emma looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "Or does it? I don't know anything anymore." "What are you feeling right now?" Michael asked, without thinking about what you should feel or what's right or wrong, just what you're feeling. Emma thought about the question, really thought. What was she feeling? Relief knowing Ryan hadn't abandoned her for lack of love. Anger that he hadn't found a way to let her know. Confusion about what to do now. Fear of having to choose. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's all so confusing. A week ago, I was about to marry Ryan. I loved him, or thought I did. And then everything fell apart. And I made this crazy decision to marry you. And these past few days I've been happier, or at least more at peace than I expected to be. And now he comes back with a valid explanation, and I don't know what to do." Michael stayed silent for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Can I tell you something? About my ex?" Emma looked at him surprised. It was the first time he'd mentioned anyone romantic from his past. "When my life fell apart, when I lost everything, I had a girlfriend, Rebecca. We'd been together for 4 years. I thought she'd stay with me, that her love was strong enough to weather the storm." He laughed bitterly. "But it wasn't. As soon as things got tough, as soon as it became clear I no longer had money, that I couldn't provide the lifestyle she was used to anymore, she left. Said she loved me, but not enough to suffer along with me. And I don't blame her. Not really, because sometimes love isn't enough when circumstances are too bad." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "Why are you telling me this?" Emma asked. "Because you need to understand that no matter what you choose, it's going to hurt. If you choose Ryan, it'll hurt to leave behind what we've built these past days. If you choose me, it'll hurt to leave behind years of history with him. There's no right or wrong choice here. There's only what you can live with. And if I don't know what I can live with? Then you give yourself time to figure it out." Michael took her hand gently. "And I'll be here for as long as you need. No pressure, no expectations, just here." Emma squeezed his hand, grateful for the understanding. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. because with each passing day, Michael was becoming less of just a stranger who helped her in a moment of desperation. He was becoming someone important, someone whose presence she valued, whose opinion she respected, and that scared her more than anything. The following days were tense. Ryan called constantly, sent long messages talking about his mother, about how much he missed Emma, about how he wanted a second chance. Emma read them all, replied to some, but always kept her distance. She needed clarity, and he was too close to the problem to provide that. Michael, on the other hand, remained a constant but non-invasive presence. He went to work, came back. They had dinner together, talked. But Emma noticed subtle changes in him. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching. The hesitation in his hands when they accidentally touched. The extra care in everything he did. He was getting attached, Emma realized, just like she was. It was on a Friday, 2 weeks after the crazy wedding, that everything changed again. Emma was at the farmer's market buying vegetables when she heard someone calling Michael. She turned and saw a man in a well-tailored suit, in his 40s, approaching with a serious expression. Michael Parker. It's me, Robert Wilson. Do you remember me?" Michael, who was beside Emma, helping carry the bags, froze. His expression changed completely, closing into a mask of caution. "Robert, it's been a while." "It has indeed." The man looked Michael up and down, noticing his simple work clothes. "I heard you were around. I tried to find you several times." "Why?" Michael asked, his voice cold in a way Emma had never heard before. "Because you need to know the truth. About what happened to the company. About Daniel." The name of the partner who had betrayed Michael made his hands clench into fists. "I don't want to know," he said through gritted teeth. "That's in the past." "But it's not," Robert insisted. "Daniel was arrested 3 months ago. They're investigating everything he did. And your family. Michael, you have the right to recover much of what was stolen, but they need you to testify, to help build the case." Emma saw the conflict crossing Michael's face. Pain, anger, hope, fear, all at once. "My family is fine," Michael said finally, though his voice trembled. "They don't need me stirring up the past." "Michael," Robert spoke more softly, "your father asks about you every day. He wants to see you. And your mother. She cries whenever someone mentions your name. They think you hate them for leaving the company in your hands." "I don't hate them." Michael's voice broke. "How could I? I'm the one who failed them." "You didn't fail." Robert touched Michael's shoulder. "You were deceived by someone you trusted. That's not failure. It's betrayal. And your parents know that. They just want their son back." Michael shook his head, visibly struggling with his emotions. Emma, who had remained silent until then, touched his arm gently. "Michael, I think you should go see them." He looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I can't. Not like this. Not without having anything to offer, without having fixed what I broke." "They don't want you to fix anything," Emma said firmly. "They want you. Just you." Robert extended a card to Michael. "Think about what I said. Call me if you change your mind, but don't take too long. The process is moving forward, and your participation would make a big difference. Not just to recover the money, but to ensure Daniel pays for what he did." After Robert left, Michael stood still in the middle of the market, the card in his hand, looking lost. Emma picked up the bags he had dropped and touched his arm again. "Shall we go home?" He nodded silently, and they walked back in silence. But it was a heavy silence, filled with everything that wasn't being said. When they arrived at the apartment, Michael went straight to the window, turning his back to Emma. "I can't face them," he finally said, his voice almost inaudible. "I can't look into their eyes and see the disappointment. See what I did to the legacy they entrusted to me." "Michael," Emma approached, standing beside him, "you've been punishing yourself for 2 years. Don't you think it's been enough?" "No," he replied with bitter conviction. "It will never be enough. Because they're in a nursing home, my mother cries, my father asks for me, And all of this is my fault. It's not. Emma turned him to face her. It's not your fault, it was Robert's fault. He's the one who betrayed, he's the one who stole, he's the one who destroyed everything. You were just a victim as much as your parents. But I should have seen, Michael insisted. The signs were there. I was just too busy, too confident, too stupid to notice. Trusting someone doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. Emma held his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. And your parents know that. They don't blame you. You're the only one still blaming yourself. The tears Michael had held back finally fell. He bent over, resting his forehead on Emma's shoulder, and cried. He cried for the loss, for the shame, for the wasted time, for the distance he had put between himself and the people he loved. And Emma held him, letting him cry, offering the same kind of silent comfort he had offered her that day on the street 2 weeks ago. It seemed like a lifetime ago now. When Michael finally calmed down, they sat on the couch. Emma made tea, as she always did in difficult moments, and they drank in comfortable silence. Sorry for falling apart like that, Michael said eventually, looking embarrassed. You don't need to apologize, Emma replied. You held me when I fell apart. It's only fair I do the same. Do you really think I should go see them, my parents? I do, Emma said without hesitation, and I think you should help with the case against Daniel, not for revenge, but for justice, and so you can recover at least some of what was stolen. Michael fell silent, processing. Then slowly he nodded. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to stop running. I'll go with you, Emma offered. If you want, to visit your parents. You'd do that? Of course, we're friends, aren't we? And friends support each other. Something passed over Michael's face at the word friends, but he just nodded. Thank you. I'd like you to come with me. The following Saturday, they went to the nursing home where Michael's parents were. It was a clean and well-kept place, thanks to the money from the sale of the family's last assets. As they walked through the halls, Michael was visibly nervous, his hands trembling. What if they hate me? He whispered to Emma. They won't. She held his hand, intertwining their fingers. Trust me. The nurse led them to a room where an elderly couple was sitting. The man, who must have been around 75, was in a wheelchair, reading a newspaper. The woman, a few years younger, was beside him knitting. When the door opened and they saw Michael, the newspaper fell from the man's hands. Michael? He whispered, as if he couldn't believe it. My son. Hi, Dad, Michael said, his voice breaking. What happened next was too emotional for words. His mother dropped her knitting and quickly stood up, stumbling in her haste to reach her son. She hugged him tightly, sobbing, repeating his name over and over. His father had tears streaming down his face, reaching out from the wheelchair. My son, his mother repeated. Are you okay? Where have you been? We were so worried. I'm sorry, Michael said through tears. I'm sorry for everything. For failing you, for losing the company, for disappearing. No, his father interrupted him firmly, even with a trembling voice. You didn't fail us. Never. It was Daniel who did that, not you. And we never, ever blamed you. But the company? It was just a company, his mother said, cupping his face in her hands, just like Emma had done days before. You are our son. You are what matters. Not money, not business. You. Michael broke down again, hugging his parents, apologizing repeatedly. Emma stood in a corner of the room watching the reunion, tears streaming down her own face. It was beautiful. It was right. It was the healing Michael needed. After the emotions settled down, Michael introduced Emma. Mom, Dad, this is Emma. Well, it's a long story, but she is my wife. Michael's parents looked between him and Emma with surprise, but then his mother smiled warmly. Welcome to the family, dear. Anyone who brought our son back to us is a blessing. Emma smiled, feeling the warmth of acceptance. They spent hours at the nursing home, Michael telling them about the last 2 years, about how he met Emma, about the work in construction. His parents listened to everything without judgment, just grateful to have him back. When he mentioned Robert and the possibility of testifying against Daniel, his father perked up. You should do that, son. Not for us, but for you. to close that chapter and truly move forward. Michael promised to think seriously about it. When they finally left the nursing home, it was already getting dark. Michael seemed different, lighter, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Thank you," he said to Emma as they walked, "for convincing me to come, for coming with me, for everything." "You don't have to thank me," Emma replied, but then she hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you introduce me as your wife? You could have said we were just friends or explained the real situation." Michael stopped walking, looking at her. "Because you are my wife, even if it's in an unconventional way, even if it's temporary on paper, legally you are. And I didn't want to lie to them, not anymore." "And what will happen when we get divorced?" Emma asked the question she had been avoiding for days. "We'll deal with that when the time comes," Michael said, but there was sadness in his voice. "For now, can we just be what we are?" "And what are we?" Michael looked at her, really looked, and Emma saw something in his eyes that made her hold her breath. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know that you've become the most important person in my life in an incredibly short time, and that's both scary and exciting at the same time." Emma felt her heart race, because she felt the same. Somehow, in the last few days, Michael had become essential. She woke up wanting to share things with him, spent the day thinking about what to cook for dinner, eagerly awaited the moment he would come home from work. This was no longer just about rebellion or about not being alone. It was about him specifically, and that changed everything. "Michael," she began, but was interrupted by her cell phone ringing. It was Ryan. Again. Emma sighed, looking at the phone with frustration. "You should answer," Michael said gently. "He deserves an answer, even if it's not the one he wants to hear." Emma knew he was right. She answered the phone, putting it on speaker so Michael could hear. There was something honest about that, about not hiding anything. "Emma," Ryan's voice sounded relieved. "Thank God you answered. I was getting worried." "Hi, Ryan," Emma said, trying to keep her voice calm. "How is your mother?" "Better. The doctors say she will make a full recovery. It was a huge scare, but she is strong." He paused. "Emma, have you thought about what I said? About us?" Emma looked at Michael, who was by her side but maintained a neutral expression, without judgment. The decision was hers, and hers alone. "Ryan, I understand what happened now. I understand it was an impossible situation for you, and I don't blame you anymore for not showing up at the wedding. So can we start over?" Hope was clear in his voice. "No," Emma said, and felt a sudden clarity. "We can't, because in the last few days I realized something important. What I felt for you was real, but it wasn't strong enough to survive the first major crisis. When you didn't show up, when I thought you had abandoned me, I was devastated. But not as much as I should have been if you were truly the love of my life." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe we both deserved something different, something stronger, more genuine. And that day, as painful as it was, showed that we weren't that for each other." "Is it because of him, isn't it?" Ryan's voice turned bitter. "That guy you married?" "No," Emma answered honestly. "It's because of me. Because I realized I was more in love with the idea of being married, of having a planned life, than with you specifically. And that's not fair to either of us." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "So that's it? It's really over?" "Yes," Emma said, and felt tears in her eyes, but they were tears of liberation, not sadness. "And I'm sorry. For everything. But this is the right decision." "I hope you'll be happy, Emma," Ryan finally said, his voice broken but sincere. "Even if it's not with me. Thank you, and I wish the same for you. Take care of your mother." After hanging up, Emma stared at the phone, processing what she had just done. She had closed that door for good. And strangely, she felt no panic or regret. She felt peace. "Are you okay?" Michael asked softly. "I am." Emma looked at him and smiled. "Actually, I think I'm better than I've been in a long time." They walked back to the apartment in silence. But it was different from all the silences before. There was a new tension in the air, a growing awareness that something had fundamentally changed between them. When they entered the apartment, Emma didn't go to the kitchen to make dinner as she usually did. She stood in the living room looking at Michael, her heart beating unevenly. "Michael," she said, her voice trembling, "I need to tell you something." He turned to her, expectant. "In the last few days, you've become more than just someone who helped me in a difficult time. You've become important, essential, actually, and I don't know when it happened or how, but it did. And I need to know if you feel the same." Michael took a step toward her, his eyes intense. "Emma, I try every day not to get too attached. I try to remember that this is temporary, that you'll eventually realize you can do better than a former homeless man with a broken past. But the truth? The truth is that I've fallen in love with you. For your small gestures of kindness, for the way you made me feel human again, for your strength even when you thought you were being weak." Emma felt tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of joy. "So, we're both crazy," she said with a watery laugh, "because I've fallen in love with you too." Michael closed the distance between them, gently holding her face in his hands. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Please," Emma whispered. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, as if both were afraid to break the moment, but then it deepened, becoming more urgent, more real. It was a kiss that sealed not only the budding romance, but also the friendship, understanding, and mutual support they had built. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless, but smiling. "This is crazy," Emma said, resting her forehead against his. "Our specialty," Michael replied, making her laugh. That night, for the first time, Michael didn't sleep on the couch. They stayed up late, talking, laughing, planning a future that now seemed possible. And when they finally slept, it was in each other's arms, two castaways who had found safe harbor in the storm. The following months were about rebuilding. Michael testified against Daniel, helping ensure he was convicted. Part of the stolen money was recovered, enough to secure better care for his parents and even to start something new. Emma and Michael decided to open a small business together, a sewing workshop and general repairs in the neighborhood. She would handle the sewing part, and he would take care of repairs and maintenance. It was small, but it was theirs, built with their hands and hearts. The community that initially judged them began to admire them. The story of the couple who married under the most unlikely circumstances and built something real and beautiful together spread. Mrs. Rose, the neighbor, always stopped Emma to say how happy she was for her. Mrs. Margaret, although still hesitant at first, eventually accepted Michael completely, especially after meeting his parents and understanding his story better. One Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the crazy wedding in the church, Emma and Michael were on the small apartment balcony, having coffee and watching the street activity. "Do you regret it?" Michael suddenly asked. "Regret what?" "Accepting to marry a ragged stranger on the street." Emma thought for a moment, then smiled. "No, not one bit. It was the best crazy decision I've ever made in my life." Even though it was so impulsive. Especially because it was impulsive, Emma took his hand. Because sometimes life requires us to take leaps in the dark. And I did. And it was worth it. "You saved me, you know," Michael said seriously. "That day when you accepted my crazy proposal, you gave me something I hadn't had in years. Purpose, a reason to keep going." "We saved each other," Emma corrected. "It was mutual. I was just as lost as you." They fell into a comfortable silence, just enjoying each other's company. Then Michael spoke again. "You know what I think we should do?" "What?" "Renew our vows. Have a real wedding with our friends and family. Not because the first one wasn't real, but because now we know what we're choosing. We're choosing each other consciously, not out of desperation." Emma felt her heart warm at the idea. "I would love that." "Then let's do it," Michael smiled. "Nothing too big. Just the people who matter, in the same church perhaps, to come full circle." "In the same church," Emma agreed, "where it all began." And that's exactly what they did. 2 months later, on a sunny afternoon, Emma and Michael got married again. This time there was no elaborate wedding dress, but a simple and beautiful dress that Emma had sewn herself. Michael wore a modest yet elegant suit, chosen with care. Mrs. Margaret was there, crying with emotion. Michael's parents, in wheelchairs but with huge smiles. Emma's friends, neighbors from the building who had followed their journey. Even Ryan sent a congratulatory message, showing he had truly moved on. Father Patrick, the same one who had performed the crazy ceremony months before, was genuinely smiling this time. "I confess I had my doubts that day," he said during the ceremony, "but you proved me wrong. You proved that sometimes love can be born from the most unlikely places, the most impossible circumstances." When it was time for the vows, Emma looked into Michael's eyes and spoke from the heart. "The first time we got married, I was broken, lost, not knowing who I was. You offered me a hand in my darkest moment, without asking for anything in return. And in the months since then, you've shown me what true love is. Not the love from fairy tales, perfect and without problems, but real love, the kind that grows in difficulties, that strengthens in storms. Today, I choose you, not out of desperation, not out of rebellion, but because I can't imagine my life without you." Michael smiled, his eyes glistening with tears. "Emma, you gave me the most precious thing anyone can give. You gave me hope when I had none. You made me believe that I deserved a second chance, that my life wasn't over. And more importantly, you showed me that it's possible to rebuild. It's possible to love again. It's possible to be happy even after losing everything. I promise to spend the rest of my life making you happy, supporting you and loving you with all that I have." When Father Patrick declared them husband and wife for the second time, the kiss was met with warm applause. There was no doubt, no sadness, only pure joy and the certainty that, despite everything, they had found each other. The small reception was at Mrs. Margaret's house, who had prepared food for everyone. It was simple, but full of love. People shared stories, laughed, hugged the couple. It was everything Emma had always wanted, but didn't know until that moment. Later, when the guests had left and they were helping Mrs. Margaret clean up, Emma's mother pulled her daughter aside. "I was wrong about him," she admitted. "I thought he would take advantage of you. I thought you were being impulsive and foolish. But he is a good man, Emma, and you are good together." "Thank you, Mom," Emma hugged her, "for trying to protect me and for accepting him when you saw who he really was." "That's what mothers do," Mrs. Margaret said, wiping her eyes. "They protect when necessary and accept when they're wrong." That night, back at the apartment, Emma and Michael sat on the sofa where he had slept so many nights. "You know what's funny?" Emma said. "What?" "If Ryan had shown up at the wedding that day, I would be married to him now, living a completely different life, and it would probably be a good life, but it wouldn't be this. It wouldn't be us." "Do you regret how things happened?" Michael asked. "No," Emma answered without hesitation, "because everything that happened, all the pain, all the confusion, brought us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." Michael pulled her closer, kissing her hair. "Me too. I wouldn't change a thing. Even the 2 years on the streets, even losing everything, it was worth it because it brought me to you." They stayed like that for a long time, just enjoying the closeness, the certainty that they had built something solid together. It wasn't an easy path, and it certainly wasn't conventional, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. 1 year later, their small business was thriving. Emma had expanded her sewing services, now making custom clothes in addition to just repairs. Michael, besides renovations, started giving management classes for small entrepreneurs in the neighborhood, sharing the knowledge he had accumulated from his old company. Michael's parents had improved significantly with their son's constant visits. His father managed to get out of the wheelchair and was walking with a cane now. His mother had taken up knitting with renewed vigor, making pieces that Emma sold in her shop. On a warm January afternoon, Emma realized she was late. A delay that couldn't be ignored. With trembling hands, she took the test. Positive, she was pregnant. When Michael came home from work that night, Emma was waiting in the living room, nervous. "Did something happen?" he asked immediately, noticing her expression. "Yes," Emma took his hand, placing it on her belly. "We're going to be parents." Michael's face went through a series of emotions. Shock, confusion, and then pure joy. He picked her up, spinning around, laughing and crying at the same time. "Really? We're having a baby?" "We are," Emma confirmed, also laughing and crying. This is amazing." Michael gently set her back down, as if she were made of glass. "We're going to be parents. You're going to be a mother. I'm going to be a father. You're going to be a wonderful father," Emma said with conviction. "And you're going to be an incredible mother." Michael held her face. "Our child will be so lucky to have you." That night they stayed up late, making plans, dreaming about the future. It was a future neither of them could have imagined on that terrible and wonderful day when they met on the street. When the baby was born 9 months later, it was a girl. They named her Hope, because that's exactly what she represented. The hope that had emerged from despair, the love that had grown from pain, the family that had been built from the ashes. Emma, holding little Hope in her arms for the first time, looked at Michael and saw tears of joy streaming down his face. And she knew with absolute certainty that every difficult step, every moment of pain, every crazy decision had been worth it. Because they led them here, to this perfect moment, to this family that shouldn't exist, but did, to this love that shouldn't have happened, but did. And it was real, more real than anything Emma had ever planned. Sometimes she thought about that day in the church, waiting for a groom who never came. She thought about the heartbroken bride who ran through the streets with no direction, no hope. And then she thought about the kind man who offered a handkerchief and an absurd proposal. It was funny how life worked, how what seemed like the worst day of her life had actually been the beginning of the best chapter, how a marriage made in desperation had become the strongest and truest relationship she had ever had. Years later, when Hope was 5 years old and full of questions about how her parents met, Emma and Michael sat with her and told the story. A simplified version, appropriate for a child, but the essence was there. "So you were sad and Daddy helped you?" Hope asked with her big, curious eyes. "Yes," Emma confirmed. "I was very sad, and Daddy was kind to me when I needed it most." "And you fell in love?" "Not right away," Michael said, pulling his daughter onto his lap. "But little by little we discovered we liked each other, and that liking turned into love." "Like in fairy tales?" Hope asked excitedly. Emma and Michael exchanged looks and smiled. "Not exactly," Emma said, "because in fairy tales everything is perfect. But in real life things are complicated. There are difficult moments. But do you know what's better than a fairy tale?" "What?" "A real story, with real people, real problems, and real love. Because that kind of love doesn't disappear when things get hard, it gets stronger." Hope thought about it, then nodded with the surprising wisdom of a child. "I like your story. It's special." "It is," Michael agreed, kissing the top of her head. "Very special, just like you." That night, after putting Hope to sleep, Emma and Michael stayed on the porch, as they often did. It was their ritual, their moment of peace at the end of the day. "Do you believe in destiny?" Emma asked suddenly. "Why?" "Because sometimes I think about all the things that had to happen for us to meet that day. Ryan not showing up, me running in exactly that direction, you being on exactly that street at that moment. It's a lot of coincidences." Michael thought for a moment. "I don't know if I believe in destiny. But I believe that sometimes the right things happen at the right time, even if it doesn't seem that way at first. And I believe that we made choices that brought us here. You chose to accept my crazy proposal. I chose to offer it. You chose to let me stay. I chose to stay. And we keep choosing, every day. I like that idea." Emma rested her head on his shoulder. "That it's choice, not destiny. It makes it more special somehow." "It is more special," Michael agreed, "because it means that every day we actively choose this love, this life, each other." Emma turned her face to kiss him, a gentle kiss full of years of shared history. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For being brave enough to offer help to a stranger crying in the street. for giving me a second chance when I didn't know I needed one, for being you." "Thank you," Michael replied, "for being crazy enough to accept, for looking beyond the surface and finding the person I was underneath, for making me believe I deserved love again." They stayed like that, embracing on the balcony, watching the city lights. They were just two more residents of New York, living their lives. But to them it was everything. It was the whole world. And as they stood there, Emma remembered that moment in the church almost 4 years ago. She remembered the pain, the humiliation, the despair, and she thought about how that awful moment had been the catalyst for all the good that came after. Sometimes she still thought about Ryan, wondering how his life was. She learned through mutual acquaintances that he had married someone else, someone he met at the hospital while caring for his mother. And she was genuinely happy for him, because he deserved to be happy just like her. There was no resentment, no bitterness, only gratitude for the role he played in her story, even if inadvertently, because without that terrible day, without that abandonment at the altar, she would never have found Michael, and Michael was everything. Not perfect, because no one is, but perfect for her, her partner, her best friend, her true love, the father of her daughter, the man who had emerged from the darkness and helped her emerge too. Together they had built something beautiful from the ruins of their previous lives. They had proven that no matter how broken you are, it's always possible to rebuild. It's always possible to love again. It's always possible to find happiness even in the most unlikely places. And that was the real magic of their story. Not that it was a fairy tale, but that it was real, with all the imperfections and difficulties of real life. And yet, or perhaps because of that, it was more beautiful than any fairy tale could be. Emma looked at Michael, at the man who had been a shabby stranger on the street and was now her family, and smiled. Because she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she had made the right decision that crazy day. Accepting to marry a stranger had been madness. But sometimes, madness is exactly what we need. Sometimes, the best gifts come wrapped in the worst situations. And sometimes, the love of your life appears when you least expect it, offering a clean handkerchief and an absurd proposal. And you just have to be brave enough to accept. End of story. So, what did you think of this story? Would you have the courage to do what Emma did? Have you ever been through something similar in your life? Tell us in the comments. We really want to know your honest opinion, and don't forget to leave your like and especially subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories like this one. Your company means everything to us.